Rough game for the Baby Blue Jackets last night, but there are some bright spots in the 8-2 defeat, and we're going to talk about what those bright spots are on today's Locked On Blue Jackets.
You're Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get things started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. So we have hockey to talk about, finally. In true Blue Jackets fashion, they kept it mostly together for a lot of the game and then fell apart late, losing 8-2 to the New Jersey Devils prospect, which is frustrating, but understandable, I think. And it's understandable for a couple of reasons. So we'll talk about kind of the game as a whole, and then I want to talk about some specific performances that I really liked and some performances that I didn't like so much. But this was a game that sure did look like a bunch of guys that have got about an hour and a half of practice together under their belts, right? And like prospect tournaments are always kind of like this, you know, it's a bunch of guys that have played against each other and not with each other for long periods of time. A lot of the Blue Jackets heavy hitters aren't here. A couple of them are, and we'll talk about that in a minute here. But like, you know, you don't have your Lindstrom, you don't have your Smith, you don't have, you know, your big names like that. So it's a lot of depth prospects with a couple of guys that should really be standing out. And you know, some of them did and some of them didn't. So makes sense, right? I also think that this is probably going to be, and I'll not knock on wood here so I don't jinx it, but this should have been the most difficult game of the tournament for the Baby Blue Jackets. They're playing the Sabres and the Penguins on Saturday and Sunday. I don't remember which way around it is. They avoid playing the Bruins, which is frustrating because I think the Bruins have the worst prospect group of the lot, despite some recent interesting additions to it. But the Devils, for my money anyway, I think the Devils have the best prospect group and of the teams that the Blue Jackets are facing. And also, quite frankly, the Devils brought more of their big hitters, I feel like. And by which I mean Seamus Casey was the best player on the ice by far, like notably, which makes sense, right? Like he's one of the older drafted prospects. He's, I believe, 22. Came in the same draft year as I believe the Kent Johnson draft year. So that would have been what, 2021? I believe. Maybe I'm wrong with that. But so, you know, he's got, I think he had 2 more years of college, and now he's got a couple of pro years under his belt. Played NHL games last year, which I don't know what the cutoff is for prospect by these tournament rules. I was surprised that Casey was eligible, but like he was far and away the best player on the ice for either team, right? Like I thought he was great, and he should have been great, you know, because it's players like him should stand out in games like this, right? He's a step above the rest of the players. That being said, the Blue Jackets had a couple of their own guys who should really have stood out, and so we'll talk about who those guys are in a second. But I wanted to kind of finish off my one thought about kind of the game as a whole, which is it's not the end of the world, right? You know, I was watching and it was frustrating, and it was a really on-brand Blue Jackets game, right? I think it was 4-2 going into the third period, and then it became 5-2 and then 6-2 very, very quickly, right? Like it was very much. I thought the goaltending was, frankly, I thought the goaltending was mostly fine, which sounds silly for an 8-2 loss, but like I saw flashes of good stuff from Lalonde. The first 2 goals were a deflection and a tip. The third goal, I believe, was the power play goal, but it was he played a little better than I expected him to, which is probably a comment on his, like, my estimation of him as opposed to his actual play. But it's very much like that was about what I expected from Nolan Lalonde, right? Gardner, again, I thought he made some good saves, but I thought he got let down in a big way by the fact that no one in front of him looked like they'd played hockey for large stretches of the game, right? So it's easy to look and say, well, Lalonde allowed 3 goals in his 30-ish minutes. Gardner allowed 5 goals in his 30-ish minutes. But I thought Gardner played well for, again, like long stretches. He allowed a goal on his first shot of the game. So I think like literally 4 seconds in or something, into his half of the game, he allowed a goal. Fine, it happened, right? Cold goalie. I thought that the Devils kept their goalie in for the whole time, which was probably a better way to have done it. If you're carrying 3 goalies and you have 3 games, then I personally would just give them a game each. But the Blue Jackets wanted to split it up. So I assume that what will happen is the three prospects will get 3 half games. So we'll see one of Lalonde and Gardner on Saturday with the camp invite, Vichari, I think his name was. And then we'll see the other one plus Vichari in Sunday's game, is my guess anyway. But it was, so he had a goal in the first shot of the game, and then I think went the rest of that period, and then kind of about, I want to say, halfway-ish into the third period. And again, made some very good saves, looked good, looked very technically sound, and then everything kind of fell apart in the third period, because that's Blue Jackets hockey, baby. Something else that was Blue Jackets hockey, baby, was the fact that they had a 5-on-3 for an extended series, an extended amount of time, and failed to score on it. Failed to score on any of the power plays that they got, which, again, like, that just probably stands them in good stead for being Blue Jackets, right? Because that's the curse. But that being said, I thought that for a first game together, and again, this will be the first time that these guys have really spent any kind of time together since the post-draft 3-day prospect camp that they do immediately after the draft, where they do, I think, 3 or 4 practices and then play a scrimmage, right? And then these guys will go their separate ways, and then they'll come back. And also, really camp invite heavy roster. I think fully 50% of the roster is like camp invites and free agent invites, right? And those are the guys that you're not really expecting much of, but it makes it harder to put together a squad. Again, if you've got a bunch of, if you've got 10 guys that are brand new to the organization, have never, I think, worked with that, a couple of returners, but like it's tough to put a team together from complete strangers and spare parts, right? And like, no disrespect to the camp invites by calling them spare parts, like maybe that's the wrong word for them, but like, they don't feature in the organization, right? I will be very surprised if any of them end up as Blue Jackets. Like, they're just guys that they bring to camp because why not, right? So on the whole, I'm unsurprised that the Blue Jackets struggled for a bunch of reasons. Hopefully they learned some lessons from this game, things to take into the next game, which is Saturday evening against, I really want to say it's the Sabres on Saturday and the Penguins on Sunday, but that might be flipped. But like I said, there are some good things in this game, and I want to talk specifically about players that I enjoyed, and then we'll talk about specifically players that I didn't enjoy. So we'll do both of those things in a second here at Locked On Blue Jackets. First, I'm going to tell you about Monarch Money. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, investments, any of that. When you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. And it's built for people with busy lives. If you've put off organizing your finances, I know I did for approximately a decade. So Monarch is for me and Monarch is for you. It does all of the heavy lifting. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. Because I don't know about you, but I I used to do the thing where I would open my banking app and then I would go to a budgeting app, and then I would open a spreadsheet and then I would give up and write everything down and then go back to my banking app and then give up and just buy another $8 latte, right? I don't have to do any of that anymore except the $8 latte bit because I am an addict. But all of that is streamlined with Monarch Money. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks like I almost did. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for 50% off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNHL. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. Let's talk about the things that I didn't like so much in let's talk about the things that I did like. We haven't talked about that. I got so used to talking about the things I didn't like that I forgot that there were things that I enjoyed in this game, which is probably a comment on me. It's preseason for us all, right? There were a couple of players that I expected to show up that did, and then there was a player that I was pleasantly surprised by, in that he was a player that I was paying attention to anyway, but he was, I think, one of the highlights of the game for me. So we'll talk about him first. Guillaume Richard was a really stabilizing presence on the back end, which was a back end that consisted of him, Charlie Ellick, who we'll talk about in a minute here, and 4 players that are not like there was Caleb McDonald, and then there was 3 camp invites. So Caleb McDonald signed out of the NCAA during the summer, so has never played a Blue Jackets game or a Monsters game yet, in fact, and was not drafted by the organization. So he is a complete unknown, as were the 3 other bottom 4 defensemen. So it was really Richard and Ellick that held down the fort, and I thought Richard did a fantastic job of it. He wasn't flashy, but you notice him doing a lot of really good things. I thought he was calm. I thought he was smart, just kind of really, really efficient, right? And I think he is going to turn into one of those players that, like, you only see him when he screws up, right? So you don't see him a lot, and you're like, oh, well, he's not doing anything. But not doing anything doesn't necessarily make it, like, that's not a bad thing necessarily, right? So I really liked his game. Like, again, like he in a game of very weak defenders and a defensive system that struggled, whether that's the coach not adapting to the players that he's got or the players struggling to, find the system workable, both of which is an option, right? Because again, it's a prospect tournament. It's the first time that these players have been on the ice together, probably. And you can't learn a system in 20 minutes of ice time. But I really, really thought that Richard was kind of head and shoulders above every other defenseman on the Blue Jackets side of things. Obviously, he matched up for most of the game against Casey, and I thought did his best to hold his own. But again, like, Casey was really just a step above everyone else on the ice, I thought. But for the most part, I really liked Guillaume Richard, and I really am excited to see him with the Monsters for a full season. Again, he's not going to be flashy. He's not going to put up a bunch of points, but he is, I think, going to quietly be a very good top 4 defenseman. I would really like to see him paired with Stanislav Svozil when the Monsters get things rolling. I think that's their 2 best defensemen. With Morelli injured, that opens up an option for Richard to maybe take a step up in the lineup. But for a guy that was a 4th round pick and that honestly I'd kind of forgotten about until they signed him to his ELC earlier this year, really, really impressed with Richard. So, like I said, excited to see him I'm excited to see him again this weekend, and also just kind of in general to get to the Monsters and see what we've got there, because that could be a really needed addition for the Monsters, who, like, they lost a lot of bodies this year. They're going to have to add guys, and guys that they added kind of at the end of last season and over the summer are going to have to step up. And I really think that Richard is going to be one of those guys, which is really exciting. Someone else that I expected good things from, but I think he impressed me more than I thought. Over Keskinen was very impressive, I thought. Again, not like flashy, but noticeable. They played him at center and Pinelli on the wing, which we'll talk about Pinelli in a second, which I thought was an interesting choice. But I liked Keskinen's game a lot. I thought, again, he was in all of the right places. That goal was great. The first goal the Blue Jackets scored, incredible pass from Pinelli to Keskinen, who wasted no time. Again, if we hear that a lot this season with the Monsters, I will be extremely unsurprised, right? I thought, again, his skating needs work, but I thought he and Pinelli worked really well together. And like, if you can get a third person for that line, because we'll talk about Jordan DeMay in a second, but he's not the third person for that line. That's going to be a really, really fun line. You know who might be worth putting on that line? Jack Williams also scored. Big burst of speed, breakaway. Brennan made the first save, but not the second. That's just a big boy goal from Jack Williams. And he, I think, is someone that the organization is very, very interested in terms of what can he bring to this lineup further down, in a couple of years, right? And I still think, probably a bottom sixer at most, but if he can establish himself as an effective AHLer, which, all signs are pointing that way. I know it's a small sample size, but he was another guy that again impressed me in limited minutes. I wanted to see more from Williams, not like more from him when he was on the ice, but I feel like when he was off the ice, the pace dropped a little bit. He was really, really a pace setter. Last guy that I will talk about in this segment is Luca Pinelli, who should have been the best player for the Blue Jackets and was the best player for the Blue Jackets, right? Like he was everywhere. Had that incredible assist to Keskinen in the first period. That first goal was just kind of exactly as advertised, right? Like, yes, he's undersized, but like that's a you problem. And if it's not a you problem, he's going to make it a you problem. Was getting involved in, scrums after the whistle, was throwing his weight around in as much so as his weight can be thrown around. I thought he was a lot more physical than I was kind of expecting. He loves to get involved in after whistle scrums. He doesn't necessarily throw his body around during play, but he did in this game, which I liked. And then, it felt like every single time the offense was doing something, one of Pinelli or Williams were driving it, right? And again, I keep saying that we'll talk about DeMay in a second, but we really will talk about DeMay in a second. But it felt like Pinelli and Keskinen created a lot of offense, and then it got to to DeMay's stick, and then just gave up, which must be frustrating for Pinelli. But I thought the chemistry with Keskinen was fun. I'm really excited to see if they continue with that or if they mix things up for the next game. I imagine they'll mix things up because, again, it's a prospect tournament and nothing matters. But, like, that's a duo that I could see having real success in the AHL. Pinelli, again, best Blue Jacket on the ice for me. Richard a close second, but really, really impressed with Pinelli, who just, again, continues to meet every challenge that is set to him, right? Like, he gets the opportunity in the OHL to take a trade to a better team, and he says, no, I'm finishing my career with the 67th. This is where I started it. This is where I'm going to finish it, which I love to see. Comes to the AHL, immediately makes an impact, scores the game winner in the first playoff game for the Monsters, and now prospect tournament, stepping up, wearing the C, which called that shot. And again, really, really impressed. Really, really liked Pinelli's game last night. Again, I'm excited to see more from all of these guys, really. But like Pinelli is one that I'm really excited about. Richard is one that I'm really excited about, and Williams is one that I'm really excited about. Like the Monsters might not be good this season, but I think that there are going to be flashes of greatness, and I also think they're going to be fun. I don't know that they'll be good, but I think they'll be fun, especially if all of these players play to their potential that I think that they can. Let's take another quick break, and then there's a couple of guys that I want to talk about that struggled. And you guessed it, one of them is Jordan DeMay. So we'll do that in just a second here at Locked On Blue Jackets. First, I'm going to tell you about FanDuel, because the NFL season is here. FanDuel is making sure that you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you're going to get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet. Player props, building a same-game parlay, jumping in live as the action unfolds, and it makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. It's quick, it's easy, It's the best way to add a little bit more energy to those game day Sundays. Once again, new customers, bet $5, and if that bet wins, you're going to get $300 in bonus bets that you can spend on literally whatever you want. Are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. Let's finish off by talking about a couple of guys that I talked about in yesterday's episode as guys that I was specifically watching because I thought that they needed to step up. And unfortunately, neither of them did. So we'll start with Jemay first, who I thought was that terrible combination of either invisible or you notice him and he's doing something wrong, right? Like he very much was the third person on that line. I think he was the weakness on that top line with Pinelli and Keskinen. Like he should have been able to keep up with those guys, right? Like you look at his scoring in the QMJHL and he should be able to keep up with Pinelli, who's also undersized, and Keskinen, who is a 7th round draft pick, right? Domain, 3rd round draft pick. Produced at about a half point a game in the NHL last season, but only played 21 games. So, there's, again, small sample size. But he, again, should have been one of the better players on the ice for the Blue Jackets. And for me, he really, really struggled. I thought his decision-making was poor. I thought his skating was not great. Like, every time he was on the ice and every time he had the puck, it felt like the offense just died, right? Like, it was like watching Jack Roslovic in the middle of February when the Blue Jackets can't score and somehow he's on the top line. You pass the puck to him and the play immediately dies. Sorry to Jack Roslovic, but like that happened a lot when he was with the Blue Jackets. Similarly, it felt like Pinelli, Keskinen, etc. did a lot of work to get the puck into the zone. It would go to Demay and he would either like bobble it or mishandle it or like things would go awry, and it was just a really poor performance from Demay, which is disappointing. I'm not necessarily surprised by this, but I am disappointed in it, right? Because again, he was a guy that I think needed to have a good game. I wouldn't be surprised to see him dropped, not necessarily from the lineup, but I think again, if they mix up the lines, I don't think he'll get as good line mates as Pinelli and Keskinen in the next game. And that's just going to make his job harder, right? But if you can't produce with the big guys, then what are you supposed to do with less good, quote unquote, line mates, right? Similarly, I thought Alec really, really struggled. Like, I don't think he was the worst player, but of the Blue Jackets, like draft picks and prospects that came to the tournament as opposed to the camp invites, I thought he was by far the weakest skater of the 10, 11 Blue Jackets prospects that iced, which is not great because I believe he's the highest drafted of the prospects that came, but he was just turnover city for Alec last night. I thought he really struggled. Like the skating I thought was good, and like his defensive awareness is not zero, but every time he had the puck, something went wrong with it, and that was just really, really frustrating to watch, right? Again, this is by no means like the end of the end for a guy like Alec or even for a guy like Dubé, right? Like Alec is 19, 20 years old. Is 19, I believe. He'll be going back to Tri-City to play there for another year and then probably making the jump to the AHL. And like honestly, that's probably a pretty good it's probably pretty good for him. Because I think it'll allow him to work on the two-way aspects of his game. Like his defensive game came over really well this season in Tri-City, especially like after the trade to Tri-City. But the offensive side of his game really, really started to struggle, and I think both sides of his game struggled in last night's game, which is really unfortunate because again, like Rashad was really good, and I don't know again if this is a case of Rashad was really good and Alec was really bad, or if it was just that Rashad was better and it made him look better by comparison, or if it made Alec look worse by comparison, right? So I think partially also it could just be that they didn't mesh, which again, it is two players that have had collectively maybe 20 minutes of ice time as defensive partners. So, I'm not going to sit here and say that they have zero chemistry and, this was terrible and they should be split up and never play together ever again. But I do wonder if that was a factor. But yeah, I was really looking for a lot more from Alec, and he gave us basically nothing, right? Just really, really struggled out there, which was disappointing. So he and Dume really need to bounce back against the Sabres. I think a lot of the team does, but like those are the guys that I think the organization is going to be watching and being like the good thing about this, right, is again, it's the prospect tournament, is that all of the organization is going to be watching the GM, the head coach, etc. And Dean Everson's not on the bench right now. So he's going to be able to. He's, I assume, watching from above. They've got footage. They've got development guys, skill guys. Obviously, they've just kind of revamped their player development program as well. So like all of these guys are going to be watching. And the good news is that a lot of these guys gave them some really solid, oh, well, this is a thing that we need to work on, right? Like, again, with Alec, it's the decision making. And that is something that is both easy and hard to fix, depending on the player and the people trying to fix it, right? But I really think that this tournament is going to give the staff and management and coaches and everything a lot to work with in terms of, well, right, now we know what to focus on, right? Because I feel like sometimes, especially with prospects that you don't see a lot, and that most I'm talking about European prospects, Russian prospects, etc. Not necessarily Charlie Alec, who plays on the other side of the country, and therefore you can just kind of hop on a plane and fly for 5 hours to get there or whatever. But I don't think that guys like Dean Everson are spending a lot of time watching Charlie Alec during the season, right? So this will give him a good idea to watch it, and it'll give the brand new player development program, the Donskar brothers, etc. will I assume they have like just notebooks and notebooks and notebooks of stuff that they want to work on now, which is great, because once you know what you need to work on, it's way easier to fix than just kind of going in and being like, let's just kind of work on a little bit of everything, right? So like that to me is the plus of a game like that, is you're like, well, now we got a lot to work on, and now we know where to aim that work. So I don't think we'll see huge adjustments for the game against the Sabres in terms of like individual player performances. I think that players will probably play better. I think that, again, they practice. I believe they practice again this morning, and they probably have a morning skate tomorrow before the game. So like they'll get some more time on the ice together. They'll get to work on some synergy and stuff like that. But I'm not going to sit here and be like, well, they're going to fix this decision making in 24 hours. But this is a long term thing, right? And it's the beginning, basically. So I'm not like going to sit here and say that all of these players are terrible and prospects are busts and blah blah blah. Definitely a lot to work on, a lot of lessons to learn, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? That's kind of all I've got for today. There might be an episode this weekend if I can swing it. We'll see how the game against the Sabres goes. If they win, then we'll record. If they lose, then I'll see you guys on Monday, which is maybe a bad way to schedule things. But either way, we'll talk about the rest of the prospect tournament in the next episode. Thank you for listening to this episode, for making it your first listen of the day every single day. We are Locked On Blue Jackets, and we're free and available on all podcast platforms, over on YouTube, and you can find us on Twitter at LO_Blue Jacket. You can find me on Blue Sky at JAKOBFORSTER. Thank you once again for listening to this episode. Again, either Sunday or Monday, we will have a brand new episode for you about the rest of this prospect tournament and ongoing. Until then, make sure you stay locked on.